And hi everyone, thank you for joining us for 15 minutes. I'm Andrew Huff. Our guest today in the studio is the Honorable Susan Craighead, the presiding judge of King County Superior Court. Judge Craighead, thank you for being here today.
I'm very glad to do it.
How's your summer going?
Well, it's been a challenge. I'm a single mother of a 15-year-old who is not having a good summer. So.
Always. You're not alone on that.
That's right.
Judge Craighead, you are currently the presiding judge of King County Superior Court. What does it mean to be the presiding judge, aside from maybe a bigger office?
It's actually not a bigger office. People are always surprised. It basically means that among the judges, I'm first among equals. We're all equal, but the rules allow a few decisions to be made by the presiding judge alone. And basically that has to do with assigning judges to locations and to departments of the court. In all other respects, leadership of the court is by consensus and majority votes sometimes, but my role is not to tell people what to do. My role is to help the court as a whole decide what it's going to do about things. In addition, I deal with upper-level management of the court and represent the court when we're dealing with other entities like the county council or the county executive or the Supreme Court.
Sort of represent the court.
Exactly, and so to speak for the court.
Sure. You were appointed to the bench by Governor Gregoire in 2007. Mm-hmm. Why did you want to become a judge?
Well, I have been a public defender for many years, and I love the courtroom. I love the people in the courtroom. And I also love intellectual challenge. So after being a public defender, I became a commissioner at the Court of Appeals for 5 years. And that gave me a lot of exposure to civil issues, which I had not had as a public defender, and I really enjoyed them. But I miss the people. And to me, being able to come back to the trial court and have the combination of intellectual challenge and actual human drama is ideal. And so that really it's the best way I could find to serve the community. And you really get that day-to-day mental challenge when you're in the court on a regular basis. Absolutely. Dealing with the attorneys. You mentioned you enjoy a mental challenge. That's certainly shown by your academic pedigree. You were a Rhodes Scholar at Oxford, obtained your law degree from Harvard. Was education something that was always stressed in your household when you were growing up? It was stressed, but not like a Tiger Mom style of education. My parents are both physicians, and they were academic physicians, and so we talked every night about their work, the issues of the world. I was basically told that I was sort of on earth to make the community a better place, and to find whatever path would help me do that. You first began a career in journalism, worked for a daily newspaper. What prompted your interest in journalism and writing and reporting the news? Well, I always liked writing. I think that's probably my single biggest skill set as a student and as a judge. And I like current events. I like being involved in drama and so forth. And so I started as a journalist in college, working for the Daily Trentonian, which was a tabloid. And I got to report on the fact that Brooke Shields was accepted to Princeton, and the cheer that went up in that newsroom. Was that first page news at the time? I think absolutely, front page news. And so I worked my way up to the New York Times by the time I was a senior. And I actually got a story on the front page of the New York Times, which was a huge, I just couldn't believe that they trusted me that much. Congratulations. And then I spent a summer at the Wall Street Journal and a summer at the Miami Herald, a summer at The Economist in London. And I really wanted to be a foreign correspondent, but I have a very serious medical condition, and it became apparent when I lived in England for 2 years that even living in England, it was very challenging there to manage my disease. And I just had to face the fact that it was not going to be possible to live in a developing country, especially a country in conflict, and take care of myself. So I decided to try domestic journalism, and I wound up at the Louisville Courier-Journal in Kentucky, which I got to tell you was a shock after working for The Economist in London. But it was a great experience. Wonderful. At what point in your life did you decide, I'm going to go to law school? Well, I really had not considered it at all. My parents detest lawyers. to say the least. And so that was something, that was sort of like one of those careers that they just did not want me to go into at all. But in Kentucky, I was assigned to cover the courts. And I really began to see how the justice system works and how it doesn't work. And being in the South, I saw some pretty blatant racism. I was shocked to find that a quarter of the people on death row in Kentucky were represented at their trials by lawyers who were subsequently disciplined or disbarred. And I started thinking about law school at that point, but then I came to a trial where it was my first death penalty case. And in Kentucky, unlike Washington, every single page of the discovery is filed in the court file. So I could read everything that the lawyers had. And I read the whole file, and the man was a white guy. He had committed a string of armed robberies going back to the 1950s. He had killed a man in about 1970 and gotten the death penalty, but the sentence was commuted to life when the death penalty was temporarily declared unconstitutional. He got out of prison. He'd done okay for a while, but then he got mad at his girlfriend and beat her to death with a tire iron, and then drove across town and beat her new boyfriend to death with a tire iron. And he had some of the best lawyers in town, and they described him as the most competent defendant they'd ever represented. So I thought, well, every argument I've ever heard against the death penalty does not apply here. This seems to be what the legislature had in mind. But then he got a deal. And granted, it was life without parole, but it was a deal. So I went to the prosecutor and I said, why did you give this guy a deal? This is what the death penalty is for, isn't it? And he said, oh, Susan, you see, the new boyfriend of this woman, he was Hispanic. And I knew that no jury in Kentucky would give him the death penalty for killing his girlfriend who was dating a Hispanic man. And I walked back to the newsroom that day.
Floored at that point.
Absolutely floored. And I walked back to the newsroom and I just thought, I cannot live in a country where this is how we decide who lives and who dies without doing something about it. And it was at that moment that I decided to go to law school.
In that vein, one of the issues as presiding the judge that you've been on the forefront is this issue of disproportionality in the juvenile justice system. You're on the forefront right now. You're out there talking to the public and working with other elected officials on reforming the juvenile justice system. A very alarming statistic that came out that you've announced last year. King County saw more black children enter the criminal justice system than at any other time. What is also ironic is that the amount of overall kids entering the juvenile justice system is down, not so for black children. Why do you think that is?
I think it's very complicated. I think there are several different factors that contribute to this. First of all, there are issues from birth forward. Family situations, the effects of hundreds of years of racism kind of piling up to the point where parents don't see a way out. They don't see how to show their kids that, yes, there is a brighter future. Then kids go to school. They are in Seattle, very disproportionately disciplined. I believe the rate is something like 4 times as high for African American students as for white students. Once a kid is suspended, they're not supervised, especially if their parents work, which most parents do, and they wind up getting in trouble, just like any unsupervised child would, and then they're on their way. So you can see the effects of the school-to-prison pipeline. Another aspect of it is that there's a lot less use of mental health services in the African-American community than in the white community, and I don't entirely know why that is. I'm sure that there are very deep cultural reasons for it, but as an upper or middle-class white person, if your child starts having problems, why, you find a therapist and you start getting help. That may not be available to somebody who doesn't have means and doesn't necessarily come from a cultural background where that's an acceptable thing to do. And so there's help that might be available but isn't either taken advantage of or actually available to people.
So, Your Honor, by the time that you see many of these kids, they've been through some very traumatic experiences, they've not had the parental supervision, they've had bad influences. So by the time you've seen many of these kids, they've been through some tough times. Now it's your turn to deal with them. You've advocated a phrase called restorative justice. Tell us what restorative justice is as a new approach to dealing with juvenile offenders.
Well, the idea behind restorative justice is to heal both the young person and the community rather than punish or focus solely on that young person, to think of them as part of a community and that the crime did damage to the community that needs to be repaired. It used to be we thought about restorative justice as a one-on-one thing. I steal your bike, then I have to somehow work it out with you. Now we think of, the way we think of restorative justice today is much more about what does it do to the community when you steal a bike, and have a lot of people involved and care about why the kid stole the bike and work on that problem as well.
Maybe sort of finding the root cause, solving that issue.
Not necessarily the root cause in terms of all of the, say, mental health reasons or something like that, but at least making sure that the youth feels like they are part of the community and they help heal the community and the community helps heal them.
Seems like that also includes a step away from detention and incarceration for a lot of these offenses. And I know probably about 20 years ago we had a movement toward more incarceration, an eye for an eye, to get tough on these youth offenders. We found out that that really hasn't worked too well. Have you found that to be the case as well?
Oh, absolutely. And you know, it's ironic because I was a public defender at exactly that time, 1997, when the Juvenile Justice Act became extremely punitive. And I listened to debates in the legislature. I mean, I actually listened to them, and people were talking about how youth should never be able to put a crime behind them for the rest of their lives. It should follow them. And I was shocked by that then, and I believed it was completely wrong, and in fact litigated a big case about whether or not the law was now so punitive that juveniles should have a right to a jury trial. And so I felt it was very wrong then, and I'm feeling gratified that I've been proven right, but just think of how many lives we've destroyed in the meantime.
One part of this plan is to restore the juvenile detention facility, the youth services center in the Central District. It is long overdue for work. It's been in disrepair. Space is highly inadequate. That's something that you're also pushing, is we've got to start on this project. I think bonds to fund this project were passed a couple of years ago, but we still have yet to break ground on this. First of all, what's been the holdup in getting started on this very much needed project? Well,
it took many years, about 10, to actually get the process, get the voters to approve this measure. And then once that happens, it's amazing how long it takes to build a building. There are many, many steps of getting community input, figuring out what's going to go in the building, and then you have to go through a RFP process. And in our case, we even had to go through what's called a best and final offer process, which is kind of like a second RFP process. And we whittled down the potential contractors and finally selected one that we're very, very happy with. And then there's even more design, and so we'll probably break ground sometime next spring. But the other part of the holdup has been a struggle with the City Council over necessary zoning amendments, and that's been kind of what's been in the news.
Judge Craighead, we're about out of time, but let me ask you this. On a normal Sunday afternoon, where would one find you enjoying your time when you're not in court?
Well, if it's nice weather, I would like to be in my garden. I love gardening, and I'm the child of a botanist, so I thoroughly enjoy plants. On a not so nice Sunday afternoon, I would be in my kitchen, because I think probably my #1 other hobby is cooking. I love to cook ethnic food, and I love to have dinner parties and invite friends over, and that's really a highlight for me.
Judge Susan Craighead, we appreciate your time today, and thank you for all your efforts.
You're very welcome.
All right. And thank you for joining us, everyone. Join us again for another edition of 15 Minutes. We'll see you soon.